Welcome back to the Feminist Frame, where we talk about popular media through a feminist lens. Today, we have another book club episode for you. We will be talking about She Said, Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story That Helped Ignite a Movement by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, and Know My Name, a memoir by Chanel Miller. She Said is from the Pulitzer Prize-winning team of reporters who broke the news of Harvey Weinstein's sexual harassment and abuse for the New York Times. The book covers the story of their investigation and its consequences for the Me Too movement. Know My Name is a memoir that recounts Chanel Miller's sexual assault, its aftermath, and the court case that followed, where her abuser, Brock Turner, was convicted but sentenced to very little time. Miller writes the book to reclaim her narrative and openly discusses the trauma she went through.
Before we get started, just as a content warning, in this episode, we will discuss sexual violence and abuse. If you would like help with any of these subjects, please go to rainn.org.
I'm joined today by my usual co-host, Aubrey.
Hey.
And I'm Olivia. So I want to start our conversation off with She Said. So as I mentioned, this follows along with our investigation, with breaking that Weinstein story. We actually did an episode where we covered Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill. So a lot of the story around Weinstein is quite similar. I think one of the major differences in She Said is that it focuses more on like the corporate structure and like power systems that were set up and sort of Weinstein's world that like allowed him to operate that way.
For sure.
But instead of like rehashing, I think a lot of the Weinstein news, which I think a lot of our listeners might be familiar with. If you're not, we can also link our episode to Catch and Kill on our website. But I kind of want to focus on some of the different aspects that Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey were able to highlight in their book that made this quite a different perspective, I think. So they definitely talk to different folks that were involved, right? One of the big ones is Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah, and she didn't end up coming out sort of with this first wave of accusers that they broke. And it is important to remember. So we covered Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill, like you said. Ronan Farrow broke the story about 10 days after the New York Times at the New Yorker. So it was New York Times was the first to break.
Yes.
And their original breaking story had Ashley Judd. And then Gwyneth Paltrow and some other big name celebrities sort of came on in the second follow-up that they did.
Right.
But yeah, I thought that sort of like the things with Gwyneth Paltrow was one of the most interesting parts of the book for sure. Or just like sort of intriguing to me because I think when you think of someone with the power and the privilege to be able to stand up to their accuser, like I can't think of someone more powerful and more privileged in my mind.
Right.
So the fact that she struggled with it too just kind of like really opens your eyes for like, and obviously again, like she did have more privilege than like the assistant who was laid off.
Right.
And, you know, didn't have money or anything else. But just, the fact that this goes all the way up and it's still harrowing and it's still scary to put that story out there, no matter how much money you have.
Right. And I mean, they do, talk to Rose McGowan and Ashley Judd, who's a boss, by the way. Who though they also have their doubts, but I definitely think Gwyneth Paltrow's story, I don't know if it's because like they focused more on her or just like the sort of like route her story went, but just I don't know. I feel like it shows you that like no matter how much money you have, this is still a terrifying experience to go through.
Yeah.
And there's
absolutely
so many barriers there. One of the things too that I thought was interesting about Gwyneth Paltrow's, it's not even her role, but like Weinstein would use her name, like essentially like name drop her to these other women, sort of like in a way to like imply that like she went along with everything and she didn't say anything. Look how famous she is. Like, he didn't even have to like say anything or like make up additional stories about Gwyneth Paltrow or anything like that. But just kind of like uses her name, and it sort of like would keep everybody else quiet, you know, like, look where Gwyneth Paltrow is now, you know, either, you know, as a like, I don't know, I can see it like being used in two ways, you know, either like, look how well she's doing, you know, like maybe I want that, like as a way of like more like coercive sort of thing, or that, you know, like, wow, like Gwyneth Paltrow can't even say anything about it, like who's gonna listen to me, you know?
Right. I think, yeah, it was a twofold. Well, and then also, you know, in his mind, he made her kind of in the possessiveness way that like he grandized himself. So when she won Oscars and stuff like that, it kind of became his proof of stick with me and look what you can do.
Right.
So, which is kind of horrible. And I think she kind of even acknowledged that she like sort of knew that he used her that way, and like a little bit of guilt about it. Yeah, it was really fascinating.
One of the other things that I want to stay on this Gwyneth train for a moment, and just jump to the end really quickly. There's other things I want to talk about that
the group, the epilogue.
Yes, the epilogue was so amazing. I think that they were able to do that. So, essentially, they were able to gather like survivors of, you know, sexual assault, sexual abuse that they've covered in these stories, including Gwyneth Paltrow, to Christine Blasey Ford, to like blue collar workers, you know, that they also like interviewed. They brought them all together, and Gwyneth Paltrow hosted this event at her house. I just thought that was a really like touching moment of just one of those like solidarity and like a communal sort of like healing moment where they can come together, like give each other advice, and just sort of like talk through these things that happened to other women that have gone through similar trials and traumas.
Well, and this was years ago, right? Like kind of when some of this was going on still. Mm-hmm. So I also like that, like, until it was reported about in this book, it was also just this private moment of solidarity for very public people.
Yes, absolutely.
And actually at that gathering is what they call it. And one of the other people that I probably thought was the most intriguing in this book, Rowena Chu was there. And at the time, she had not yet decided whether she was going to come out.
Right.
And Rowena Chu's story is kind of like what we were talking about. Like, she was an assistant. So when he assaulted her, I want to say was at first she quit. And then they tried to hire her back and tell her that she was going to go get to like, what's that called? Scout like Chinese actresses, because she's Chinese American. And basically she figured out that it was just like to get her to sign a non-compete, and it was total bullshit.
Yeah.
And it was just so devastating. Like, not only did he do this terrible thing, but also like played with her life and a career in a way that,
oh, for sure,
is just awful, which what he was known for. But yeah, like, it was interesting hearing her interact with these people who had a lot of power and also who were largely white, and kind of talk about how it was different for her.
Yeah. And it's, you know, and she originally came in just to sort of like document the event, you know, kind of like bear witness to it. But, you know, through that conversation that these other women were having, and like she decided, you know, later on that she would come forward officially, and I think that was, I don't know, that's, I think, a testament to what having open and honest conversations about these sort of things can do.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I also, and then there's small things that I liked about that kind of group part where it's just like Ashley Judd giving like sort of like public relations advice to Christine Blasey Ford, you know, just like
Yeah.
cute things of like, oh.
Yeah. Quite quite interesting. Speaking of Christine Blasey Ford, they also devote a portion of this book to sort of her case and the Kavanaugh hearing. And I thought one of the just most stark comparisons that they do is between how Christine Blasey Ford composes herself and gives her like testimony and how like Kavanaugh does. And it's something we've all seen, you know, I don't know about you, but I remember the day I was at work and I watched like the whole thing streaming. I probably shouldn't say that because I probably should have been working, but I was just watching, you know, this hearing streaming live, and I saw both testimonies. And it's something that we all saw. But like, it almost takes like saying it out loud where you realize the like hypocrisy in it all. So like Ford, you know, the way she conducted herself, she's measured, articulate. She's very careful with her answers, calm. Kavanaugh was angry and blustering and spittle was flying. He's accusatory and combative. Normally, like whenever a woman acts like that, you're like, she's crazy. She's flying off the handle. She's overreacting, you know, all of these things. But like, you know, we see this man do it and like that was fully acceptable for some reason for some people.
Yeah.
You know, and just I think just the hypocrisy and like the way we talk about how men and women should behave in these kind of things. And it's just fully, it's devastating to think about like what these women have gone through and like what they have to put themselves through just to be believed or come off as being believable. Because some of them aren't even believed after all of this.
Right. Well, and some friends of mine I remember pointing out at the time too is like not only just that, but Christine Blasey Ford was white, upper middle class, educated, you know, respected in her career and sort of at a point of privilege that like if anyone was going to be believed, she had the proper background, the proper, like you said, like just persona and meek brand of femininity that like is most likely to be sympathetic to, you know, the US as we've seen historically, and it still didn't matter. You know, it's just like it's another thing where it was like what would happen if that was someone poor or, you know, it's just it's one of those like when you have that much privilege packed into it and you still can't even touch his privilege, it's crazy.
For sure. So part of, I guess, what this all sort of like folds into is the Me Too movement, right? And I think that She Said does an interesting job. They do sort of pose this question, having to deal with like the reckoning that sort of happens after Weinstein, that like really blossoms into the Me Too movement. And I think they deal with it in a thoughtful way. So I kind of wanted to get your take on it. So they talk about, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I was just going to say, yeah, I remember having sort of a knee-jerk reaction at first because they talk about just like the whole, and not, they don't phrase it that way, but like sort of the problem with an accusation like Christine Blasey Ford's. Like they're journalists and their whole prerogative is to go verify things like leads and things like that. And with sort of an accusation like this, like there's no way for them to corroborate it.
Right.
And there's no actual legal route for it to take.
Right.
And so they kind of grapple with what they think about it and what they think it means as like people who are meant to verify the truth. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, my knee-jerk reaction, because I'm a feminist who wants to believe all women, was just like, well, fuck him though, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but like thinking about it more and more, I was like, I do get why that gives a lot of people pause. Mm-hmm. I still feel like we're not even close to getting back power, so I'm not really worried about going too
Right.
far yet.